So we have a very distinguished panel with us this morning, as described in their bios in your program. I'm not going to go through all of their accomplishments and background, but let me just say that we are very privileged to have the director of the Census Bureau here with us. He's only been on the job since January 7th, and as you all know, there's a kind of important activity taking place next year. So he is a very busy man, and we're very honored that he took the time to come out and be with us this morning. So now I'd like to turn it over to Stephen Dillingham to offer a welcome on behalf of the Census Bureau. Dr. Dillingham.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Linda, for the hard work by you and your team, Mark Mather and Lillian Kilduff, and the American Community Survey Steering Committee, and many others in preparing for this important event. I'd also like to thank Jennifer Ortman and Jim Treat and a team of others that are here from the Census Bureau, some power users and some leaders in the ACS activities. They perform critical work for the Bureau's mission and programs. The conference agenda reveals that you have an impressive group of experts, and such talents will ensure that this is an exciting and informative conference, and I'm honored to be here, and a special thanks to everyone for letting me join you today. As part of the Census Bureau family, we appreciate the importance of the large data collections, especially the American Community Survey, or ACS as we call it. I'm certain that you recognize its value and a multitude of uses. Still, we're always examining how to make the data more useful, more user-friendly for everyone. And in that regard, the data users are the key to the continuous improvement process, and we invite your observations and suggestions. Of course, the ACS was developed to replace the decennial census long form in collecting vital information. As you're aware, we are now preparing for the 2020 census. With less than 1 year to go until what we call Census Day 2020, we are dedicated to ensuring that we are ready, willing, and able to accomplish the mission of the 2020 census, which we repeat over and over again, is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. To date, our systems and operations are on track, and we're eager to get started, but there's still a lot of work to be done. We internally, as we go through and have weekly briefings, and we're having one today, I was really impressed with the spreadsheets, but we have identified over 26,000 activities we have to do, so we need to get with it, and we are doing very well. We're monitoring at least more than 100 of those on a weekly basis. The 2020 census is a huge undertaking and is at the forefront of people's minds, and including mine. Still, the Bureau continues to support the ACS with strong backing from users across the nation. The ACS is valuable in so many ways. It's considered by many to be the flagship survey of the Census Bureau, and we conduct more than 100 surveys and censuses at the Bureau. It's a premier source for detailed information about the American population, providing detailed social, economic, housing, and demographic data for America's communities every year. The widespread use of and reliance on the ACS is evidenced by the range of experts that I was just noting in your agenda in areas of transportation, healthcare, tribal and rural community development, city planning and housing. I know on the way here I was speaking with Dr. Smith, who was with the Department of Transportation, and he was telling me how he had used it on commuter data, including with using the, especially pertinent to American trucking practices across the nation. In the years since its inception, the ACS has greatly contributed to the development of communities across America by helping government officials, community leaders, and businesses understand the changes taking place in their communities. The ACS has more than 300 known key federal uses, and I know that's an undercount, and far more uses at the state and local level, including economic development, local planning, advocacy, research, and policy. We frequently hear from communities of many benefits from the information that the ACS provides to the public, to the private, and to the nonprofit sectors. We are proud of the role that the ACS plays in support of our nation's communities and the dedicated staff at the Census Bureau, who are doing all they can to continue the ACS's success. You will hear much more about this from Jim and Jennifer and others from the Census Bureau that will be participating in the conference. We also recognize insights from experts and novice data users, and they're all indispensable to our work. We consider all of you as both our stakeholders and our partners, and your feedback is extremely important to us. The national statistics community is experiencing a number of exciting changes and challenges in the collection, analysis, and integration of data sources. Those data sources may be generated by federal, state, and local agencies or by the private sector. Rigorous and imaginative approaches are needed for us all to better understand the changing dynamics of our nation's population, its demography, and economics. The ACS will continue to play a key role in analyzing these topics and building our knowledge. Let me just mention a few examples. Last week, I had the opportunity to attend the Committee on National Statistics seminar on linkages between federal, state, and local data. Perhaps some of you were there. I was looking for Connie Citro. I see she's on the agenda, but I imagine she'll be arriving soon. The seminar highlighted the barriers and benefits of using combined data sources for policymaking. For example, some presenters engaged in researching state issues, discussing their progress in integrating administrative and other data from across agencies in the areas of child health, education, and development. Presenters representing a variety of data users highlighted the need for academic programs, such as public health and administration, to embrace the work of data scientists and to develop new statistical methodologies. Additionally, the recent Foundations for Evidence-Based Policy Making Act of 2018 encourages the federal statistical community to explore methods to combine, refine, and complement data sources while protecting privacy. The act requires the executive branch agencies to develop their policy-relevant questions for which they intend to develop evidence to support policymaking, including the data to facilitate the use of evidence in policymaking. Now, the Office of Management and Budget, with help from the federal statistical community, will be providing guidance on some of these topics, hopefully later this year. I know Nancy Potok is working very diligently on that, as well as others. Finally, among these same lines, the National Academies of Science in their 2017 report, Innovations in Federal Statistics, Combining Data Sources While Protecting Privacy, highlighted the need to investigate ways to exploit the strengths of integrating different data sources. This can, in part, meet the needs of evidence-based policymaking by answering questions about whether government programs produce their desired results. I'm sure all of you in the audience today have expertise and interests that will be in the forefront of identifying new and valuable uses of the ACS data and to meet the increasing demands of relevant decision-making and knowledge creation. Of course, the unfolding frontiers and challenges that you address are not without risk, and you will need to remain vigilant in protecting privacy and confidentiality. As researchers, statisticians, and data scientists, we are all dedicated to providing quality statistics for the public or private good. Accordingly, we must commit to respondents, to data users, and the public that we will fulfill our obligation to safeguard information while producing relevant, high-quality data and analyses. I want to thank all of you and as professional data users for spending your valuable time with us. Your input and ideas will play an important role in shaping the capacity of the American Community Survey to meet a growing list of future needs. I wish you all a very productive and enjoyable conference, and I also wish you continued success in your exciting and innovative analytical efforts in the search for knowledge and a better understanding of answers to today's and tomorrow's needs. Thank you, and enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much, Director Dillingham. Our next speaker is Jim Treat. who is the Assistant Director for Decennial Census Programs. But from 2011 to 2015, Jim was the chief of the American Community Survey Office, where he championed the formation of the ACS Data Users Group and the first two ACS conferences in 2014 and 2015. We wouldn't be here today without Jim's early support and his tireless efforts on behalf of the ACS Data Users Group. So please join me in thanking him and welcoming him back to the ACS conference to provide some important ACS program updates. Jim. This is on if you want to do that, or you can page down.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, and good morning, everyone. This is a homecoming for me because Linda asked who was here. I was here for the first one. I was online for the second. I missed the third. So I've got like a 3/4 attendance record. It's nice to come back to a friendly crowd of people that are excited about the ACS and to be able to be given the opportunity to provide updates on where we are with the ACS and our relationship with the 2020 census. And that's a really critical component, and I'll explain it when I get later in the presentation. So first of all, I'd like to say welcome to you all again, and also to throw out some thanks to many of the people that worked on today's event. We're here for 2 days. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that got us here today. And it was a partnership, a strong partnership and relationship between three critical groups of people. First of all, PRB, Population Reference Bureau, Linda, Mark Mathers, and Lillian Kilduff. I'd like to thank you because without your efforts, this would not be here today. In addition, I want to thank the steering committee. This is a group of people that have volunteered their time to participate in supporting the program through this effort and other activities. And without their support, we would not be here today, and we would not be moving forward with the program like we are. And so I want to thank them very much for their volunteerism and the time, the commitment they've given to the program to help support the ACS as we have gotten to today and as we move forward with the program. And then lastly, I want to thank the Census Bureau staff. Without the commitment to the folks at Census to be involved, to be reaching out to the data user community, to be actively engaged, we wouldn't be here either. We recognize that, on a day-to-day basis, we have to keep the survey going. But ultimately, the data users, the customers at the end of that train, when we release the data, are why we are doing what we do. And without their support at Census, we would also not be here. So I want to thank that cooperative relationship and partnership between those three groups of people for the work that they've done. In addition, I have some good news and sad news. The sad news is Tori Velkoff, who was the division chief over the American Community Survey Office, recently took a job at Census to become the Associate Director for Demographic Programs at Census. And she left the program after a little over 2 years of leading the program. And I want to thank her for her leadership in the program. She's still engaged in several elements of the program because those people who work at Census know you never really quite leave a job. You might go do some more stuff, but you always carry all that stuff with you. So while Tori is in a new role, our demographic area is the sister-brother relationship because ACS sort of has its foot in two worlds. It's the replacement of the long form, but it's also a demographic survey. So it has a dual relationship at Census, and by having Tori over in the demographic area is like having a good friend that will help support the program and create additional partnerships. And so I'd like to thank Tori for her leadership and support. Thank you very much. So the data user community is a valued community, and I want to also reach out to all of you and say thank you so much for your support because you've provided help, and I'll explain some of the things you've done in the presentation that have helped to support the program, but also do a little bit of a shout out later as I move forward. But I'd also like to thank you all as well. Moving on to my presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the impacts of the lapse in funding on the program. I'm going to give program updates and then talk a little bit more about data user resources. So as you know, there was in late December of last year through January timeframe, there was a partial government shutdown. We were closed for about 5 weeks. The American Community Survey was not one of the programs at the Census Bureau that was funded during that period. And so as a result, we were not doing the work that we needed to do to keep the survey going. So field data collection activities stopped. Our end of year processing and beginning of year processing activities were put on hold. Not a really great time for the survey. But when we got back to work, the staff at headquarters, also our staff in the field in our National Processing Center in Jeffersonville, Indiana, and our field staff jumped right into the program to get things kick-started and moved forward. And that resulted in us being able to get the program back on track. And as of March, the ACS data collection was back on schedule as we had planned going into the year. A lot of that has to do with the work of our field staff at our National Processing Office. They worked miracles to get the survey up and running, getting the mailing materials stationed and positioned to get those out, to do the data collection for the paper questionnaires. We were not the only survey that they were dealing with. There were other surveys that they also had to get up and running. So they prioritized, focused on this. And so that was a lot of effort both at headquarters and our field offices to ensure that that program got moving. We have as a result of that, we are changing our normal pattern for releasing data to a staggered approach for the 2018 data products that are going to get released later this year. And this slide is sort of the first public presentation of what's going to happen this year as a result of the 5-week shutdown of the ACS. Our normal process for releasing the 1-year data products, we usually go out in early September to release the products with the PUMS data and the supplemental 1-year estimates going in the mid-October timeframe. What we're going to do is we're going to take the traditional 1-year release and we're splitting that into 2 releases so that we can give data, some data on a slightly delayed schedule and then the remaining data on a little bit of a later schedule. So you'll get the detailed tables, the data profiles, the summary files on the 26th of September, and then the remaining products will come in mid-October. The microdata file, the PUMS, and the supplemental estimates also get shifted. We decided to move the supplemental 1-year estimates to 2020 because we also wanted to balance the need for the 5-year data products as well. And you can see the schedule there for the 5-year data products. We normally, as you can see, a four release date plan. We now are at a seven dates for releasing the information. We believe that as a result of the shutdown, the 5 weeks, we were able to sort of get things a little bit later than normal, but still to meet the majority of the needs on a timely manner for the data users. As I said, it happened at one of the worst times for us as we transition from end of year to beginning of year for the survey, when we do a lot of work in preparation for producing the data products and the tabulation of those products. So let me talk a little bit about some additional program updates related to it. As some of you may be aware, in September of last year, on the 26th and 27th, the Census Bureau partnered with the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's Committee on National Statistics, the CNSTAT group, and we had an expert steering committee workshop that gave us updates on status of research that has been taken place since the last public workshop that was held in 2016. This was a really great conference that we had, or workshop, where we focused on 2 major areas. The first was use of administrative data and third-party data to improve the operations for the ACS, and then boosting respondent participation through improved communications. As you know, surveys are suffering from declining self-response rates, and the ACS is one of those. And so our continued research and efforts to try to ensure that we get good self-response rates, good response rate overall to the survey is important to us. Jennifer Ortman is the third person in this panel. She's going to talk about the research that was done related to administrative data. It's really quite very interesting research. It's not as cut and dry. I'll leave it at that because I don't want to steal her thunder related to it. In addition, the Bureau has been working on its new dissemination platform, which is data.census.gov. This has been an effort where we have reached out to our data user community to get them engaged in that effort to try to gain feedback from them. It's an ongoing effort related to it. Currently, as of June of this year, which is just next month, there will be no more new releases of data in American Fact Finder. Our new dissemination platform will be what will be used for the release of new data. So the schedule that I showed on the previous slide is all going to be in the new dissemination platform. This platform will be the primary way to access the 2018 American Community Survey data, the 2017 economic survey census, as well as the 2020 census and more. We're moving to this new vision based on feedback to streamlining the way that data and digital content is going to be presented from the Census Bureau. And it's not just us, it's how people consume information. And so we're going through the process to reinvent and figure out how is the best approach to be able to present information. This has been an effort since 2016. There's been an effort since 2016 where we have been developing the site based on customer feedback and continuous releasing of new improvements every few months. The big thing is that at tomorrow's morning session, the plenary session, Zach Whitman, who is the Census Bureau's chief data officer, is going to be here to discuss the new platform. So he's going to come in and talk about things that have been going on related to that. In addition, Tyson Weister from we call it CEDSI, but it's the Center for Enterprise Dissemination Services and Customer Innovation, a big long name, that's why we refer to CEDSI, will also be demoing the data.census.gov in the breakout session after this session today. So if you haven't seen it and you're curious about what's going on, I encourage you to come and see that right after this session. And then staff will also be available at the roundtables tomorrow from 11:30 to 12:45 to also talk about this. We recognize the importance of communicating with the data users and to make that transition from the current methodology to the new as seamless as possible. And staff are also looking at ways to help with that in communications as well. And then we're looking also at strengthening our disclosure avoidance and disclosure protections related to the survey. There's a vast amount of public accessible data that's out there, and the increase of computing power has made it a lot easier for people to identify respondents. And the concerns at the Census Bureau is about the commitment to quality, but also the commitment to confidentiality of our respondents. And it's important for us to ensure that we have the right protections on our data products. And so there's been to stay within the bounds of what's mandated through our Title 13 legislation. And so there's a huge effort that's been going on. There's been discussions at other conferences about the dissemination methodology, the disclosure avoidance methodologies, to talk to the data users, talk to the public to explain what we're trying to accomplish. And it will have impact on our data products, but we're committed to ensuring that we provide quality information that keeps respondent respondents' data confidential so that you don't reveal information about an individual. Because if we have that, then we're not going to get the participation in the survey that we need in order to be able to put out good data on the survey. So we're working to strengthening our disclosure methodology, and it's in the early stages for ACS, and we're moving forward with that. Another shout out at tomorrow's plenary session is that Rolando Rodriguez is going to be there from the Center for Enterprise Dissemination, and he'll be discussing more details on the disclosure methodologies and what we're planning as we move forward. It's not only impacting the American Community Survey, but all data products that the Census Bureau puts out, including the 2020 census and the economic programs. And then finally, I just want to do a shout out to the ACS. I'm really proud of this, is that the American Association of Public Opinion Research is awarding us, actually on Saturday at APOR's annual conference, an award on our impacts. It's a policy award on our impacts related to a program that provides information that helps and facilitate better informed decisions. And so if any of you are going to be at APOR, I will be there on Saturday at the session. We're going to be there to accept that award, and I'm excited about that. Moving on, I want to talk about how ACS has been used in support of our big brother or big sister program, which is the 2020 census. And there's been a lot of things that have been happening where ACS has been identified as a support mechanism that shows the versatility of the program in supporting something that's so critical to the census, the country, but still keeps the program being able to stay on track. We have the ACS implemented the data internet collection back in December of 2012, and that implementation strategy and approach was used to help in the designing of the 2000 design for its internet option. In addition, data from the ACS is being used to help inform the mailing strategy and the contacting strategy for the 2020 census and how we're going to implement that approach for 2020. In addition, we had conducted in 2016 a test on a content test on race and Hispanic origin that provided insights into how we're moving forward both for 2020 as well as for the ACS. Our focus was on the non-responding universe, which was not part of the 2020 census testing, so we were able to provide insights to that. In addition, our data was used in helping to identify site locations for the testing program. One of the big things, which is a huge feather in the cap, is that when you look at ACS and the tabulation that it does, I was amazed by this number that in the course of a year, we produce over 11 billion estimates on the program. And in order to produce the margins of error, each estimate has to have 80 replicate estimates in order to produce the margin of error. So the magnitude of the amount of processing that the ACS does in order to release the 1 in the 5 year products is amazing. And that tabulation system is being used to tabulate the 2020 census, not only for the 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia, but also for the island areas, which is doing a long form census, very similar to the content that's on the ACS. And in fact, the ACS questionnaire was used as the starting point for the island areas as a starting point for their collection for that. So it's the utility is amazing. And then in addition, we are conducting this year, it's called the 2019 census test for the 2020 census. There's been, you've probably heard it, sort of controversies around the inclusion of citizenship on the 2020 census. And we are running a test this year with Census Day being July 1st in the ACS infrastructure. It's replicating the 2020 questionnaire, one version with citizenship, one version without citizenship. And we're going to do all three modes of self-response data collection: internet, paper, telephone. to test to see what's the impact on the self-response rates for the 2020 census of the inclusion of the citizenship question in it. And this is an example that I'm so excited about, because as we transition into 2030 research, my vision for the program is to have ACS be the testing environment for the 2030 census. We have an ongoing infrastructure that runs like clockwork every month. And by us being able to do this for the 2020 census, it shows, again, our versatility and the availability to support more than just the program itself, but to support corporately programs here at the Census Bureau beyond just the ACS, which helps to support the program ongoing. And then lastly, there's a tool out there, it's called the Response Outreach Area Mapper. We call it ROAM. It's a mapping tool that uses track level data that is publicly available, that ACS fed and provided information to help in support of not only the 2020 census, but all areas of the program overall, that the Census Bureau and other areas outside. And staff will be available tomorrow at a roundtable session from 11:30 to 12:45 if you're interested in seeing a demo of the ROAM tool, if you haven't already. It's a really cool application. It's fun to play with. So let's talk about data user resources. A lot of you are probably familiar with the handbooks that we have out. We have been going through an effort to review these data user handbook series. I will say we got a shout out at the Census Scientific Advisory Panel meetings this recently, advisory committee, unexpected to us, about the greatness of these tools that we have provided. And we have been going through a process working with our partner in PRB to update those handbooks and modules for data users. And in fact, we've introduced something new for the handbooks, which is user stories, which is real live examples of how the data is being used to provide people for that particular group an understanding of how you could use the data in support of it. And currently, we have updated handbooks, the general handbook for general data users, business users, the American Indian Alaska Native population, and then state and local governments. So those handbooks are fresh off the presses, but in a digital way. And in addition, we're going through and we're going to update the handbook on rural areas, for Congress, for federal agencies, researchers, journalists, and one for the Puerto Rico Community Survey. So that's a really important thing that we are continuing to provide support for our data users. And then in addition, 4 modules. These are shorter versions of the handbooks that they've also been updated as well. One on PUMS, the summary, the API, and the geographic products. So those handbooks has also been updated. And then one of the things that I sort of want to talk to is speaking about the data user stories. We invite you to stay in touch with us and to tell us about how you're using the American Community Survey data. And what we're really trying to be able to understand is not only the analysis you did and the questions you were answering, but what was the important decisions that you used, that you made as a result of using the data? Because that's the story that's important. Not that you just ran analysis and you looked at X versus Y, but when you had that information, what was the policy decisions or decisions that you made related to the work you do, and to communicate to us. It's important for us to have those real world stories and examples so that when we're talking to the people that fund us and other advocates for the program, to be able to give good examples of how the data is being used and for what purposes. So it's very important that we have that. So I'm doing a shout out to you all to think about and letting us know those usages. In addition, we have resources for the data users related to webinars. This is the upcoming series of webinars that we're doing, our current schedule. We are also partnering with the Economic Directorate for the first time to offer 4 seminars on aspects of our data in use with employment, emergency planning, healthcare, small business and minority business owners. There are sessions, roundtable discussions tomorrow on several of these topics. So I encourage you to look at the agenda if you're interested in those, and any one of those. And then lastly, just doing the shout out for the data user community. When we first thought of this back before the 2014 first conference, it was about creating an environment for data users to network. Today's conference is that. So take the opportunity to talk to the people you don't know and to get a better understanding of who are out there. But there is also the online community that's important. And I think we have over 2,400 data users or people that are signed up. And I encourage you, if you're not a member of the online community, to participate in that. It helps you all being able to network not only in a personal environment, but in the digital space to connect and and to find out what's going on out there. It's also an opportunity for you to profile the stuff that you're doing so that other people can leverage and be informed on what great innovative usages of our data that you've figured out that you can't live without. And then here's ways to stay in touch. And before Linda throws me off the stage, as a researcher, I have to also do a survey like Linda did at the beginning. I'm just curious, how many people here have actually been in the survey, have gotten the survey? If you haven't, what I would encourage you all to do is to go online, download the PDF version of the paper questionnaire, and just go through and answer it to see what the respondents' experience is like when they have to fill out the survey. It's very insightful when you have experienced yourself, so that when you're looking at the data, you know what sits behind it, what the respondents have to do, because they're an important element of this whole program. And with that, I will say thank you.
And while I'm switching presentations, I would like to invite those of you who are holding up the wall on that side. We have plenty of seats over here, so if you want to take a minute to come and sit down, please do so. Okay, so our final speaker this morning is Jennifer Ortman, who is the Assistant Division Chief for Survey Methods and Measures in the American Community Survey Office. And she's going to give us an overview of key ACS research programs and results with an update on the use of administrative data in the ACS. Jennifer.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you to all the folks from PRB, the steering committee, and the census staff who were, I know you've all been working very hard to pull this conference together, and thank you to all the data users who are here. It is really a wonderful thing to be able to leave the Census Bureau and come out and spend 2 days with all of you who love our data as much as we do. So I am going to talk today about the research that we're doing to enhance the survey. Some of you may be familiar. We call this our Agility in Action program. Before I delve in, for those who might not be aware, quality is a big deal for us at the Census Bureau, and particularly in the ACS program. We are focused on quality, ensuring quality in terms of efficient survey operations, providing quality data for our data users, for all of you, and providing a quality experience for our respondents, for the millions of respondents who are filling out the form online, by paper, or with an interviewer each year. Our robust research and evaluation program seeks innovative ways to enhance quality in all aspects of the survey program. So I got quite a few things to cover today, but I promise, Linda, I'm going to stick to my 25 minutes. I'm going to start off with a very high-level overview of our Agility in Action research program to introduce those of you who might not be familiar and remind those of you who have seen presentations about this in the past. Then I'm going to talk about some of the changes very briefly that we are in the process of implementing in 2019 and 2020. And then I will be talking about the respondent materials in 2020 because there's some changes coming. And then I'm going to spend a fair bit of time talking about what we're doing to integrate administrative data into the ACS, and then finish up with some upcoming opportunities for stakeholder engagement. So back in 2015, the ACS program formalized its research agenda in a document called Agility in Action, a snapshot of enhancements to the American Community Survey. This was the first version. We tend to just call it 1.0 in the building. This research agenda documents the respondent-focused research that we developed based on the 2014 ACS Content Review. So those of you who attended the 2017 Data Users Conference may recall that Tori Velkoff talked about these research initiatives and the results. So this included reducing the number of follow-up contacts that we make with our respondents, improving the survey materials and the way we ask questions, beginning our evaluation of data from other sources for potential use in the ACS program, and removing questions about flush toilets and presence of business or medical office on a property. We've continued on. In 2017 to 2018, we did work that we included in Agility in Action 2.0. Over the last couple of years, we've been investing efforts to enhance respondent mail materials, continue on and deepen our exploration of alternative data sources, modify the modes and design of the ACS, ensuring agile design of the survey, and working to understand better the survey experience from the perspective of our respondents. So here's a few things to report on in terms of where we're at and what we accomplished. So for enhancing the respondent mail materials, we have been continuing our tradition of trying to improve these materials with the objective of increasing the understanding among our respondents about what the survey is and why we're asking them to fill it out, reducing their concerns about the mandatory nature of participation in this survey, and ultimately, we've been trying to increase self-response. So in this research cycle, we utilized an interdisciplinary approach to identify best practices for mail message sequencing, and that work is continuing at this very moment with development of brand new mail materials to send out to our respondents. We validated once again the efficacy of mandatory messaging. It works to tell people they have to do it. A very small number of respondents find it quite off-putting when we note that it's a mandatory survey, but most seem to read your response is required by law, take it seriously, and do the survey. We also worked to optimize content and identified some cost savings by using pressure seal envelopes in place of some of our traditional letters. I'm not going to spend too much time here because I have a whole series of slides talking in much more depth about administrative records. But as part of Agility 2.0, we deepened our exploration by testing the feasibility of using administrative records to provide data on some of our housing topics. And stay tuned, I'll get there in a moment with some results. And something else we did in Agility 2.0 was to spend some time trying to better understand the survey experience in terms of how our respondents view it. So our goal here was to listen and learn. We followed up with past ACS respondents and asked them about their experience with the survey. So one thing we did was to analyze correspondence from respondents to understand the key issues they experienced. So those who had something to say and actually reached out to us to say it, we wanted to see what were the common themes. We learned from feedback questions that are used on other surveys and then took a deeper dive with our respondents to learn how to ask them about their survey experience. And as we've just recently closed out Agility 2.0, we are in the process, it's sitting on my tablet right now in draft form, of putting together Agility in Action 3.0. We've defined some broad key action areas, and we're filling in different research projects for each of those. The high level, we're looking at listening and learning, responding and adapting, and innovating and evolving. So hopefully within ideally the next few weeks, but maybe next couple of months, you'll see Agility 3.0 out on our website. So we are in the process of implementing changes to the ACS content based on results from our 2016 ACS content test. And in 2019, we made changes to the questions on telephone service, commuting, weeks worked, class of worker, industry and occupation, retirement income, and relationship. We also added a new question to the survey in 2019 on health insurance premiums and subsidies. And then in 2020, we will be implementing the version of the race and ethnicity questions that will be used on the 2020 census. There are detailed reports for each of these topics about what we tested, what we found, and what the new content looks like. Or I'll be around today and tomorrow if you want to talk to me offline a bit more. We are actually in the process of working toward our next content test, which is scheduled to, the field test portion is scheduled for 2022. And we have another ambitious list of topics that we're trying to tweak and improve. Okay, and then revisions to the 2020 ACS mail materials. So you heard from earlier, we have a thing called the 2020 census next year. This can be very confusing for respondents. So there's actually two things we're doing with our mail materials next year. First, starting in January, I mentioned we've been doing a lot of research on our mail materials. We actually, based on testing we did in 2018, we will actually be implementing new mail materials in the field for the January 2020 panel. These new materials are better, the goal and what we think they do is they better emphasize the benefits of participation. So our new mail materials will use updated logos on the envelopes and letters to identify to respondents more clearly that this is information, a letter coming from the Census Bureau. We are putting the phrase "open immediately" on some of the envelopes. We'll be using bold lettering and call-out boxes to highlight elements of the materials we hope, and our testing suggests it works, to capture the attention of busy respondents who might not want to read the whole letter. We will also be highlighting the mandatory nature of the survey. Mandatory works. If we tell people it's mandatory, they seem to respond by doing the survey. So we're going to emphasize and highlight that information. And then we actually are taking out some of the inserts, so the frequently asked question information, rather than providing it as a separate brochure, we're going to include that information in the letter. So we're streamlining those materials. So that is what's going in the field in January. Now, around March, American households are going to start getting invitations to participate in the 2020 census. We know from past experience with the 2010 census that it can be very confusing for people if they get the invitation to respond to the 2020 census, or in the case of 2010, the 2010 census, and then also get a mailing from us either before or after that letter comes saying, "Hey, lucky you, you're in the ACS, we'd like you to respond." Most Americans don't know these are two separate data collections. So from the period from March to September of 2020, we will be modifying our ACS materials, not just the mail materials, but also the field representative flyers, the interactive voice recognition system that those who call us enter into, and our frequently asked questions. So these materials are being modified to communicate to respondents that the ACS is separate from the 2020 census, and that if you're selected for the ACS, you should complete both the ACS and the 2020 census. So we will also be doing some testing during that period to learn about what messages might work a little better and to hear from our respondents so that we have some data going into 2030, because we anticipate in 2030 we're going to need to be doing the same kind of thing. So once we get to October, we're going back to our normal production materials for the remainder of the year, and those will remain in place continuing on into 2021. Okay, so that's the high-level overview. Now I want to spend some time talking about the work that we're doing to integrate administrative data into the ACS. So those who've been coming to this conference since the beginning have been hearing Over time, we've been gradually doing more and more to see what we might do to pull administrative data in to the ACS. Well, the question I asked, and I think many of you might ask, is, well, why use administrative data? We have a wonderful survey. It collects all these wonderful topics. Well, why should we be thinking about administrative data? Well, there's a few reasons that I think are quite compelling. One, we can reduce potentially the amount of information we're asking from respondents. If we already have an administrative data source that fills that need and provides that information, we don't need to ask somebody to provide it. We should only ask what is necessary that we need to know from our respondents. The administrative data could potentially increase data reliability. And this we're thinking in terms of our editing and imputation procedures. Using administrative data may also save money if we're able to reduce the need for personal follow-up visits. It could also potentially decrease processing costs. And the Census Bureau is mandated by Title 13 to maximize the use of already available data whenever possible in lieu of conducting direct inquiries. So there's actually statute that supports that we should be doing this when we can. So how might we use administrative data? There's a really creative group of people at the Census Bureau, and we've come up with all kinds of ways that we think we can potentially use the data, and we're making some great progress on a few of these topics. So if the quality of the administrative data is acceptable, I'm going to come back to quality in a moment, administrative data could be used to replace census and survey questions. We could use administrative data to edit invalid or inconsistent data, or to fill in missing responses. These data could also be used to create blended data products that would enrich the data we receive from our censuses and surveys. It might actually expand the number of topics beyond the 35 plus we currently cover on this survey. And using administrative data from sources such as the Postal Service could help us identify vacant or non-existent housing structures and reduce our non-response follow-up costs. We can use administrative data as a benchmark for evaluating our data and to assess and improve data quality. And for remote areas that are very difficult for us to reach, we think we might be able to use administrative data to support our survey operations. So as you can see, we've come up with a lot of ways that we think we might be able to use these data. But quality really is a big factor in determining where we move forward and potentially in a production scenario. So we've been spending a lot of time thinking about quality, and we've come up with a list of currently 12 guiding principles. So these are principles that we are using as we evaluate each potential data source, administrative data source, and whether it's a candidate for using it in place of asking a survey question, or for editing or imputing, or just in collaboration with the survey data. So I'm just going to go through the list briefly. We do have some documentation on the website with more detail. So this is the first 6. So authorization. Does the Census Bureau have a formal agreement in place to obtain and use the administrative data? And that there's many agreements that allow us to do research. We, in some cases, need additional agreements to be able to use these in a production environment. Availability. Are the data available for every year? The ACS is an annual survey. We provide data every year. We need data that's timely and available on a regular basis. Conceptual alignment. Do the administrative data correspond to the concept that the ACS currently intends to measure? Coverage. How comprehensive is the coverage of the administrative data with respect to both geographies and population subgroups? It's the American Community Survey for a reason. We need to be able to represent small populations and small geographies. The data source. So do the data come from a trusted and respected source that is above reproach and conflict-free? I'll talk a bit about what the different data sources are in a moment. And then disclosure avoidance. Does the use of administrative data preclude the Census Bureau from ensuring disclosure avoidance of personally identifiable information? We want to be thinking about this as we go down this path, particularly for using administrative data that are actually publicly available, and that's something like property values, or property taxes and that sort of thing. Those are generally publicly available data. And then the last 6, the impacts on estimates. So to what extent does the administrative data source diverge from a survey response? And also whether or not the differences carry over to other variables. So we use information from other topics in editing and imputation. So Inserting one topic and replacing it could have impacts on other estimates. We want to think about the intended use, so how the administrative data will be used, whether it's for editing and imputation or substitution or a blended data product. The population universe are these administrative data intended for use to measure something for the total US population or just a population subgroup. The quality, and we're thinking here about what is sufficient data quality for the published estimates, and do the administrative data meet those quality requirements? Reliability, are the administrative data available and consistent over time? And last but not least, temporal alignment, do the administrative data correspond to the time period referenced in the ACS? So those are the things we're thinking about when we're evaluating these sources. We have administrative data sources we house administrative data at the Census Bureau from a variety of sources. We have federal data, state and local data, as well as third-party data, and some examples are listed. So an example of federal data includes Internal Revenue Service data. We have data from states on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And then an example of third-party data is data we have on housing topics from CoreLogic. So we've been spending a lot of time evaluating these data, and what we've been using these 12 guiding principles to do so. And while we're looking at all 12 principles, our research lately has been focused heavily on the principles of coverage quality, conceptual alignment, temporal alignment, and the impacts on the estimates. We have evaluated administrative data sources for ACS demographic, social, economic, and housing measures. The demographic measures, such as age and sex, generally have a high level of conceptual and temporal alignment, but the coverage quality and impact on estimates varies by data source and measure. On the other hand, the social and economic measures, such as income, have great coverage, but they have less conceptual and temporal alignment. And for the housing measures, things like property value and real estate taxes, we have decent coverage, and we have found promise in reducing missing data rates by using administrative data in our editing and imputation procedures. But we have concerns about the availability and reliability of these data, as many housing items are compiled by third-party vendors for which we have limited or no control over. So in evaluating all of these data sources and what we currently have available, we have determined that a lot of this has been focused on housing because it's easy to link the housing data because we have an address. It can be harder to link people because we don't necessarily know until we're in the household with the survey who lives there. And we found in the case of the housing topics, several of these are very burdensome. People may not recall the information or know it without looking something up, such as if you think about property tax, not everybody knows what they paid in property tax without going back to their records to see. So what we've concluded based on our evaluation is the acreage, property value, real estate tax, and year built are the most promising of all the housing topics we've evaluated. And so those are the 4 topics that we've continued on with our research. So we've done a case study. We have used these housing data in a simulation where we've actually replaced ACS responses with the administrative data to see what would happen. We want to see if it could go through all of our processing systems and to see what the impacts were. So we did this with 2015 ACS data. We replaced, in the case that we could match and link to an address and had an administrative record available, we replaced those values for those who provided data through either the internet or an in-person interview mode. Automated modes are easy for us to toggle on-off switch for we ask you the question, we don't. In the case of anyone in the 2015 ACS where we could link, but they had completed the survey by paper, we only use the administrative data if the respondent left that item blank. So if they provided data on the paper questionnaire, we used their self-response. So we ran the data through and created a simulated set of estimates to compare to our published estimates. So I'm just going to touch on some of the highlights of the results. There is a very detailed report on our website for those who want to get into more granularity. So we looked at a number of what we termed key estimates and learned some interesting things. So approximately 79% of the 575 US level estimates for these 4 items were statistically different. So 79% were statistically different when we compared the simulated and published versions. Not unexpected, but we wanted to summarize that. While the direction of the differences varied, many of the simulated estimates were lower than our published estimates, particularly those for the property value item. Using administrative records allowed us to obtain significantly more data than what we get from survey response alone. So this did reduce our allocation rates for missing data. The simulated allocation rates ranged from 2.3 percentage points lower for acreage to 12.4 percentage points lower for real estate tax. Our edit and allocation procedures use reported data from one or more survey items to validate and allocate data for other survey items. And one reason we chose these 4 housing items was because these items do play a role in our editing procedures. And so despite the small role that these items play, we did find notable changes to other items not included in our test. For example, when we use administrative data for property value, it impacted household income. That's a bit of a red flag for us, so we're evaluating a bit further. So I'm just going to show you a couple of maps for property value, what the difference of the simulated minus the published estimates looks like. So this is the state level. The warm colors, so the yellows, oranges, red, that indicates that the simulated estimate was lower than the published estimate at the state level. And the interesting thing here, so we see generally the simulated estimates are lower. In some states, they're quite a bit lower than others in terms of that comparison. The interesting thing is where there's more similarity, where that difference is smaller, it's not because people are reporting their property value more in alignment with administrative data. That's reflecting generally areas where we didn't have administrative data that we could use. So if there's a small difference, generally that's because we were using more self-response or interview data. So this is the state level view. We also looked, this is 1 year data, so we can only look at geographies with population 65,000 or more. So when we look at those counties that meet that population threshold, we see there are, again, most of the differences show simulated estimates being lower than the published estimates for property value. But we do see some counties where the simulated values are higher. So that intrigued us. And so to better understand why that might be happening, we went down to the place level. Again, just places 65,000 or more, since we're using 1 year data. And the interesting thing here, as we started to be able to identify some of the specific communities where the simulated estimates were actually higher than the published, one example is Flint, Michigan. So in Flint, Michigan, the ACS response data is indicating that the property values are lower than what the simulated estimates with administrative data show. So something that really intrigued us is that ACS data may be reflecting more real-time evaluation of some measures when things like public health crisis or weather-related events are happening in communities and impacting them. The survey data and having a respondent value may be better reflecting what's going on in that community than the administrative data. And then my last graph, there's many, many more in the paper, and we also have a data tool for this product. In terms of burden reduction, these maps show you for each of the 4 items the potential burden reduction. That means we could use an administrative data source instead of asking the respondent to provide the data, looking at the national level across the counties. And if as you get into the shades of green and blue, that indicates a higher percentage of burden reduction. So we see there's some areas where the burden reduction could be great, and it tends to be in the urban areas. In some of the rural areas, we see, at least right now, we aren't able to either make the linkages or have an administrative data value if we can link the data to fill in there. So there's many places where we could potentially not ask the question, but other, and it's a specific geographic, especially if you look at value, the property value, you see a lot of sparse areas on that map. Those are areas where we would not have an administrative data source with the current data that we're looking at. So on the one hand, there's great potential for burden reduction. On the other, we don't have consistent geographic coverage. And that's something that's important to us. We're trying to represent all of America's communities, not just the urban areas. So I'll just quickly go through some of the key findings from this study. We have learned now that we can improve our allocation rates by using administrative data, and we do have potential to reduce respondent burden. So this is wonderful to learn. So this is definitely a direction we want to continue research and evaluation. There are concerns with the differential coverage, and that relates to the burden reduction map that I showed you, and the differences between the estimates derived from the administrative versus self-response data. There's great promise, but at present, with the approach that we've adopted here, this could compromise the ability of the ACS to represent all areas as equally as possible. And then I'll just summarize. We've learned a lot of lessons, and the ones we've summarized as takeaways is, one, direct replacement alone is not enough. So we anticipate at a minimum we need to develop modeling procedures for these data. There's a potential for improving our edit and imputation methods. There are risks with using an outside vendor. So with these housing data, this is a third-party vendor that we purchase data from. The contracts can change. It could be a different vendor, outside vendors who don't necessarily tell us what they do to the data before they give it to us. So there's some concerns we have. There's potential linkage bias, and record linkage is an area we want to focus more attention. There are impacts at all stages of our survey lifecycle, as well as to other survey items, so we have to think carefully through how we pull these data in and use them. Acquiring the data can be challenging. There could be complications with data disclosure, especially if we're using data that are publicly available. And there could potentially be restrictions on data release. So if we're using data from other agencies, they have their own rules about what data can be released. And so we may or may not be able to release our estimates if they're commingled with administrative data for some of our data products. So we're continuing the research looking at how we fill in the blanks for missing data. We're delving into IRS data. We're gaining more access to those data to see what we might do with the income questions. We'll be comparing the characteristics of our housing units that match to an administrative record with those that don't. We really want to improve that record linkage to make that geographic coverage more even. And we have numerous research initiatives looking at how we might blend these data. So I'll just, because Linda's giving me the stop, the last thing I wanted to mention is the upcoming opportunities for stakeholder engagement. We've been going out to as many research conferences as we can to share our research and hear from others in the field experiencing these things. We are also working with external researchers right now on our ACS mailings. We would be interested in collaborating on any of our research if you have an interest. And if you have ideas for how we might better engage you all as data users, we would love to hear them. Thank you.
Great. So we have some time now for questions. So if you have a question you'd like to pose to the panel, please queue up at one of the microphones on either side of the room, and you can just turn the switch on top. All right, Penelope's going to make her way over there. And please introduce yourself and say who you're affiliated with so that our panelists know your context.
I'm just going to ask my question. I'm Penelope Weimerter. I'm from Asheville, New York. Jennifer, on your slide with all the four graphs of the country, the second one was property taxes. I am wondering, did you do a bias analysis how much uncovered area that you have is public land?
Hi, Penelope. Thank you for the question. No, we have not conducted a GIS analysis per se, but we're working anywhere where we publish estimates, we're working to compare. So we haven't been looking at public lands per se. This was focused just on what would the impact be to the estimates and the data products and the things we publish.
I'll get a real quick one.
Okay.
Andy?
Yeah, I think that would be a slightly different research focus and something we haven't delved into yet.
Andrew Beveridge, I'm a professor at Queens College in the Grad Center of CUNY, and I'm also co-founder of Social Explorer. I'm actually very interested in the property matching that you came up with. Did I miss it, or did you use CoreLogic as your vendor?
Yes, we're using CoreLogic data for these 4 housing items.
Okay, yeah, no, that's it. Because the thing about housing items, and I've actually merged ACS data with housing items. One of the problems with housing items is that, I think you pointed it out, is the price, of the property, can be from an assessment, can be from a recent sale, can be from a recent sale geared to an assessment. That turns out to be a very complicated thing, and looks like you're doing a good job there. And I think you showed that it was complicated.
Thank you for the comment. Yes, there's a great deal of variation in terms of what we think the property value represents for different counties and different states. So in some cases, we don't have great coverage, but in some cases, there's inconsistencies with what those numbers actually represent.
Well, you could go get it from all 3,000 and something counties, but even then, it would be difficult. And there's also like sales data. I mean, it's really a hairball.
Yes, that's an excellent adjective to use.
Good morning. I'm Bill O'Hare, President of O'Hare Data and Demographic Services. I know everybody at the front panel knows my interest is on data for children, and you're probably expecting a question in that context, and I'm not going to disappoint you. So let me briefly a little context for the question that I have. I thought I was paying close attention to the Census Bureau, but at the Population Association of America meeting about a month ago, I was caught off guard by noting in a presentation, or seeing in a presentation, that the 2020 census, based on the new confidentiality regime, will not produce data that ties children to their parents or to their household characteristics. So we won't have data like the percent of kids in single-parent families, or the percent of grandkids living with grandparents. So giving that as background, I'm trying to imagine how the new confidentiality regime will be applied to the American Community Survey. And given what's happened to the census, I'm worried that that same criteria may be used in the ACS, where we won't have any data that ties children to their parents or their households. I know you haven't made any decisions about ACS yet, but is there anything you can say that would comfort me?
So Bill, what I would say is that we are working very closely with the Center for Enterprise Dissemination on what the disclosure avoidance methodologies will be for the ACS. And this is a very timely and the perfect question we were hoping would be asked, but I would suggest coming back tomorrow, because Rolando Rodriguez will be presenting on where we're at with that research and what we're looking at and pursuing for the ACS. We have not made decisions for the ACS, but we are working very diligently to ensure that we are adopting and improving our disclosure methodologies as we go forward. But that's about the extent of what we can say this morning. But Rolando will share more details tomorrow about where we're at with that research.
One quick, any timetable on when decisions will be made?
There's no timetable, but what we're working to do is as quickly as we can. We always want to be protecting the confidentiality of the responses. So we are working and spending a lot of time on understanding these methodologies, evaluating them, and hoping to make decisions to implement them as quickly as possible, but as responsibly as possible in the ACS program. But I can't tell you exactly when we'll be doing what just yet.
Could I ask one more follow-up so no one's standing the other thing? I know at the PA, when I heard this, a lot of demographers felt they didn't have adequate opportunity to give the Census Bureau their perceptions and their input. So I guess I would urge you going forward to make sure there are plenty of opportunities for this group and other demographers, data users, to have some input in those decisions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, we still have a couple more minutes. I gave Jennifer the hook so you could ask questions, so now you're making me look bad. All right, Cliff is making his way.
Thank you. My name is Cliff Cook. I'm with the City of Cambridge, Massachusetts. I just wanted to make a comment on the use of administrative data to determine housing age. I think that's a topic that needs more research. Let me give you an example of why. In Massachusetts, and this is certainly true in my community, and I believe it's true in others, that data is probably coming from our assessing data. The assessing databases do record the year the property was built. However, that isn't necessarily what it is. It's either the year the property was built or it was the year the property was last given a major rehab. So the difference in age can be quite substantial on some occasions. And it really matters for a community like us. We're a CDBG entitlement community, and one of the criteria for determining your CDB allocation is the age of your housing stock. The older the housing stock, the higher your allocation. So if you move that age forward, let's say somewhat substantially across 10% of your housing stock, it could cause a significant drop in your funding allocation. So I just urge you to take a closer look at what those numbers mean in each state. I suspect it's going to be different, unfortunately.
Cliff, thank you for providing the example. I didn't quite have enough time to get into some depth on some of these topics. And that is one of the things we've actually been discussing with my research team, and we'd love to engage with those of you externally who have experience with the data, because there's a lot of nuance, and what the value means isn't what you necessarily think it means.
Exactly.
And we want to consider that along with what somebody might be responding when they get that question on the survey.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Larry Mugler with Arapahoe County, Colorado. I was curious, will the release of the 2020 ACS data be re-benchmarked to match to the 2020 census results?
My expectation for the 2020 release is that we'll resume our normal release schedule following this, the September 1-year release and December 5-year release. I don't believe it'll be tied to the 2020 census release. Those are on different timetables.
I didn't mean the date, I meant the number, like will the population in a
Oh, the
census
intercensual
tract?
estimate. Yes, the 2020 ACS will be tied to intercensual population estimates that will be based on the 2020 ACS.
Thank you.
I'm Kate Nessie at Seattle Pacific University, and a thought occurred to me as we were talking about uniformity in reporting property values and characteristics of the property. The FBI has a uniform crime report that police departments can voluntarily participate in, and more police departments are participating in it because they find it helpful to then use that data to compare themselves to the rest of the country. Is that something that the Census Bureau might consider, having some sort of voluntary program that would create uniformity in reporting those types of things?
Well, we would absolutely be interested in participating or considering anything that brings uniformity to the data. That's not a particular data source we've evaluated for use, but we continue to pull in more and more data at the Census Bureau, and we are open to considering anything that would be available to us, whether it's appropriate and something we might proceed with. But thank you for that suggestion for that data source.
Okay, no one else? Oh, one more. Last question.
Hi, my name's Rachel Weinstein. I'm a data analyst from the data center in New Orleans. My question's about the mandatory stamp. I'm not sure what it used to look like, but I was wondering, you said it increased overall response rates, but I'm wondering if that, for marginalized communities, especially with this administration and like that authoritarian thing that we're dealing with the Census 2020, if that's something that you guys looked at, just bias that might exist in the data now.
So our research in this area is focused at a national level. So when we conduct our mail tests, we develop the different treatments, add a phrase about mandatory, take away a phrase. And these are statements like your response is required by law. Those are the types of statements that I'm talking about when I say mandatory. So we're doing national level work in that sense. We do get information from field representatives, from people who write in, whether it's respondents who write directly to us or through their elected representatives. We do take into consideration what we hear from respondents, and we do periodically go out and do focus group type of testing to hear more from our respondents, and that's something we've done recently to better understand what their perception of the survey is, and in particular the language we use to talk about it.
Thanks.
I just wanted to add to that also. What we have seen in research, and I think it's held up over probably several decades, the biggest obstacle to completing the survey is actually opening the questionnaire. Like differentiating the mailing piece from junk mail and from other things and getting the respondent to do that. And while we've seen in early research, this was when it was first implemented and tested, was respondents didn't like it, but it got them to open the envelope and then move them into completing the questionnaire. If we can get them to do that, they might not like it, but it gets them moving in that direction, and they recognize that. I didn't like being told it was required by law, but it got me to complete the form. And so that's what we're trying to do, and balancing that with all of the other things they get, but also differentiating how these mailing pieces look from other things, not only from other mail, but the pieces themselves in the strategy and the number of pieces we send. And so this has been an ongoing set of research that has been happening and will continue to happen as we continue to look at self-response rates to the survey to try to see how we can improve that moving forward. So I think it's an ongoing conversation and a body of research that we just have to continually keep moving forward on.
Okay, please join me in thanking our panelists once again.